great to see everybody here. Maybe I'll just start by introducing myself. So my name is Adam Garnet Jones. I'm the Director of TV Content and Special Events at APTN. I've been at APTN for, it's not working? Oh, or I just need to get closer. Director of TV Content and Special Events at APTN. I've been there for a few years, and prior to that, I worked as a writer and director, and spent some time working at Telefilm and the CMF as well. So I've kind of been on both sides of the industry there. Do you guys want to just introduce yourselves one by one? You want to start, Jessica?
Hello, is it working? Okay, good. Hi everyone, I'm Jessica Meya. I'm a writer-producer. I have written on both comedy and drama, primetime shows. Started in teens and transitioned into primetime. My current credit right now is Children Ruin Everything, which is currently on season 4 at CTV, 8:30 p.m. Thursdays. And yeah, that's it.
I'm Bita. I'm a story coordinator and a writer. I'm also a comedian. I do stand-up. Sorry, I don't know why that's funny. I do stand-up and improv. And I started as a kids TV writer and then made my transition into primetime. And not to copy Jessica, but my most recent credit is also Children Ruin Everything.
Copy me.
Hi, I'm Floyd Kane. I'm a writer, producer, showrunner, yeah, I'm looking forward to the panel.
All right. So this is a kind of a weird panel in that the topic, I think, requires kind of us to talk in circles a little bit. So I just want to set the table. And I wrote it down, which feels embarrassing, but all right, I'm going to go for it anyway. So there was a brief period where it felt like audience and broadcasters were open to stories that challenged the status quo. We saw that in prestige TV that addressed race, sexuality, class, and politics with bravery and complexity. Now we're in the middle of a swing toward conservatism and an embrace of the status quo. You see that in the way broadcasters are looking more consistently at episodic formats that are comforting to audiences. We're looking at cozy crime, heroes with heart, that kind of thing. And I can say that as a broadcaster, I am part of the problem. For creators who want to make work that engages with difficult questions and may not want to say the thing that's most comforting all the time, how do you sell your ideas to the industry? How do you bring some of those challenging stories and ideas into the content that you're making? It's kind of the big picture question. And so maybe if each of you could speak to what your recent experience is of that kind of a dynamic or shifts that you see in the industry toward something that's a little bit more conservative, a little bit more conventional.
Who wants to go first?
Anybody?
Okay. I mean, definitely, I feel like I've been in the industry long enough that I've kind of witnessed how you went from having characters who were diverse, but there was no story, no messaging, like they were just there in the show, to going to where, okay, we want to have a rainbow of people like leading the show, but we're not going to get into the thorny issues around their identity as a racialized person, to where we were, I think, a scant 5 years ago, where we were willing to talk about difficult things in our shows, and we were encouraged to kind of look at authenticity and making sure that characters actually had that intercultural life, to where I feel like now we're moving back towards, yes, we want to make sure that we have the complexion of our world, but we kind of want to keep it nice and light. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a really challenging thing for creators, especially in the drama space, because I do think that there's an unconscious reality that when you go in and you pitch a show, and you pitch that show with somebody who's a person of color, there's an expectation that there's going to be some sort of like trauma base or darkness within the context of that show, which is not necessarily the same assumption when you're pitching a show that has a white lead.
Absolutely. And do either of you want to speak to comedy a little bit, since that's kind of where you're at right now? Do you see a similar tendency?
Yeah, I think, well, yeah, I have thoughts. No, I think that with comedy, my instinct is always to like heighten kind of the issues that I want to talk about to make them a bit more comedic, and I haven't. I guess I've gotten some pushback on that. I also think for me personally, whenever I am like pitching a show, I feel like I am encouraged to kind of talk about my identity and the issues surrounding that. Like, I feel like I can never just make a show about a girl living in a city. It always has to have some kind of thing to do with her identity. So yeah, there's kind of two extremes, I guess, where you're not allowed to talk about it that much and where you're only expected to talk about it.
Yeah, for sure. I think that I relate to both what Bita and Floyd have been saying. I think a really big challenge for me was being that writer who was coming in with something that maybe was a little bit more episodic and had a very familiar world, but just happened to star a woman of color, and then having to pretty much balance between how much of this story do I want it to be about her identity, or how much of it am I just telling a story about someone who's just trying to save the world. And then all of these other things that make up her identity just come naturally and authentically with the story. I think that that's something that I continue to try to figure out every day. And I also feel like, if I'm finding the right producers who will encourage that, and also at the same time will encourage the story, I think that that is probably like the best situation for me.
Absolutely, and then you get the broadcasters into the mix, and things can sometimes change. We were talking in the green room about how, when you're coming up with a show, when you're pitching a show, when you're talking amongst friends, you're coming from this point of view of like, this is what I care about, this is why I want to tell this story, this is what's meaningful to me, and when you're pitching a more complicated show, maybe more intellectually or emotionally complicated, you can do that. But in this current climate that we're talking about, the format sometimes comes first, where broadcasters and others are coming to you and saying, we want a show that looks and feels like this. So in that kind of an environment, how do you respond as a creator, where maybe you are thinking about, like, this is the kind of space that I want to play in, and work your ideas from there?
I think for me, the way I approach it is I try to if I have like a clear sense of the central themes or ideas that I want to convey in the show, I try to keep that alive, even within an episodic format. It's really tricky, but it is something that, for me, makes it easier to have those conversations with producers and networks when I can be very clear about, well, here's what I'm trying to say with the show. Yeah. This is the piece I want to protect. So we can include like all the other things that they're looking for, but at the same time, like the heartbeat of the show is like something that you really want to know, really want to protect. And I think that that's something that is the way I approach it for me personally. So I feel like, yeah, you're always gonna find ways to find your own authentic voice, but everything is kind of framed around that beat, that central idea.
Do you guys want to weigh in on that?
All I will say is I think that, you know, because we're writers, what's great about being a writer is that you have the choice to, when you're inspired by an idea or something that's personal for you, you can just write it, right? You don't have to wait for somebody to pay you to write it. You don't have to write it for the marketplace. You can actually just sit down and put pen to paper. Sorry, I'm showing my age. But you can do that and just, like, you know, make that. You know, if you're writing for the marketplace, well, that's a whole different story. And you have to decide, does this show, does the foundation of this show stand on this quote-unquote hidden message that I'm trying to put into it, or can I go out into the world and pitch this show without it and still make it work? So I think those are the kind of questions you have to ask as a writer.
And do you think that it actually changes, or that it necessarily changes the content of the show, or is it just the way that you're talking about it? Like, as you guys are talking, I'm sort of thinking about pitching as a kind of code switching, where it depends on, like, what you put forward as the center depends on who you're talking to.
Yeah, you do tailor, like, sometimes we'll tailor the pitch for different people, like different just like producers or broadcasters will be like, okay, we like highlighted this part of the show for them, but maybe let's hide that and highlight this other thing. But it's all, you're gonna make the same show, but I don't know, the way you sell it is you're just highlighting different parts of it, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I mean, honestly, I think everyone does that, right? I mean, you go into a pitch with a broadcaster, and then you come out of the pitch, and then you kind of decide, oh, well, I'm going to tweak this because they want this as opposed to that, right? Like, I think some of us do that when we're going into the pitch, right? I was recently out pitching a legal show that was about an all BIPOC law firm, and what the show was really about at its center was about this kind of crabs in the bucket thing that happens between racial groups, right? And I'm really like, as a person, I'm really interested in exploring that theme, and I really wanted to explore it in the context of a television show. Right. So I got to a point when we were pitching the show where I kind of was like, I don't know if I can pitch this show in Canada, because we were pitching it in the US, and I'm like, I'm not sure the broadcasters in Canada will get this. They'll understand it. And so when we were thinking about bringing it out in Canada, we were like, well, maybe we'll just change all of this stuff thematically and make it give it a different theme. And ultimately, we just decided not to take it out.
Yeah, that makes sense. How is the show doing? Is it currently out in the US?
No, because it's not blue sky.
Yeah.
Blue sky is what everybody wants. Cozy crime. It's not that. So we're just sitting on it until everybody is like, oh, we want dark dramas again.
Okay, so that's a really good point, because that's the thing. It's like, we were talking about this in the green room too, like how cyclical this industry is. It's like right now, everybody wants a cozy crime, but just like, yeah, exactly. Like, put that fun little dark mystery, scary thriller that you're trying to pitch, and like, there will be a time for it. Like, don't give up on it. There's gonna be a buyer out there for it, for sure.
Or workplace comedies. Yeah. That's all they want.
Or none of them. It depends on the year. Well, I guess, yeah, so as writers, as creators, how do you prepare yourself for that reality when you're putting a show together, you're pitching a show, and in the back of your mind, you have to know who you are, what you're bringing, what your intentions are for the show, and then also be prepared that you might need to pivot. The broadcaster might want a certain thing. You might have to make a decision where you say, oh, we're not willing to compromise in that way. That's a lot of different things to hold simultaneously while you're trying to sell your show. How do you do it?
I still don't know how to do it. I think my heart breaks many times because of just the amount of, overthinking that I'm doing in terms of like, okay, if this show was going to this specific broadcaster, is there a procedural in this? Like, is there something here for them? But I also feel like, kind of like to what Floyd was saying earlier, like you kind of just have to be real and honest with yourself, because like if you can find whatever it is that they're looking for within the show that you're building and the characters and it makes sense, by all means, go forward. But I think that sometimes, especially through the development process, if you get to that point, I feel like through that you also find out whether this is a good fit or not. And I've had situations where I've had to walk away from projects because it wasn't in line with what I wanted to say and what the producers or the broadcasters that they wanted to pitch it to wanted. And that doesn't mean that there's not another idea in me that's right for them. It's just like for this specific project, not gonna happen. And so it's hard to think about exactly how you do that, but it really is about like, is this what you want to do? Can you see yourself? Like, does this make sense for the story, the message that you wanna say, but also the characters and the world, and does it fit in whatever broadcaster's world? And if it does, then great. If it doesn't, you gotta be able to, just park it and save it for another time.
The show I've had the most movement on it's a kids show, and it's something that everyone says will never get made because only preschool shows get made for kids, and I wanted the show I'm like developing is for preteens. But I've weirdly got the most movement, and even though everyone knows and keeps telling me it'll never happen. But it's like it's the only show I've gotten into development for, and we're like, I don't know. So I don't know. I guess you have to keep working on the stuff also that you want to do, even though everyone's telling you it's impossible. Yeah.
But also, if you're getting interests, like even if they're telling you it's impossible, but they're still expressing interest, that means that there's something really exciting about it, and that there's something about that idea or what you bring that's kind of undeniable. And you've got to let that sink in and float you to the next thing or through that one. If when the days get tough. How about you, Floyd?
I just think that. And just to speak about Canada for a second, I think part of the issue is that, and I think writers are starting to understand this, I think producers have already understood it, but we can't just develop for Canada. And so I think we also have to, so in the context of this conversation about hidden messages and, the challenges of writing big ideas, there are certain territories around the world who are happy to have the big ideas in the show and not hidden, but have them be part of, the log line of the show, right? But it's just about finding, but that means that as a creative, you have to take the time and find those kindred spirits who are actually gonna want to make your show. So even for you with your preteen show, it's like you'll find the company or the producer who will be the champion for your show, and they will get it made, right? So that's the thing that I think that we have to, yes, I mean, when we talk to our broadcasters here, it might be cozy crime, procedural, serialized if it's, you know, got some marquee talent behind it, but otherwise, like, we don't want it. But that does not mean that you don't take your material, which may have that big idea that you want to write about, and take it to the US, take it to the UK, find partners around the world who can engage with, who you can engage with, find a co-creator who's from a different territory who can help you accomplish what you want to accomplish. I just think that we have to, I think the big thing that everyone's getting used to is that the industry is global now. And we cannot, like, as creators, we have to be thinking about that every time we put our pen to paper, and we have to be thinking about that when we go out to sell, because that means that we have the world to play with.
That's great. There's so much in that. There's something, I think, in all of your answers that kind of unites them is a certain amount of, I guess it's a combination of grit and faith and optimism about your own work, your own ideas, your own content, and knowing that the thing that you're doing right now is not the last thing that you're going to do. If the moment for it isn't now, it's going to be, you know, sometime down the road, and maybe the moment for it is now, but you need to go and look at different territories. Yeah, I think that's a really powerful message of standing behind your own work and your own ideas. I'm wondering about getting to know that global market. My question as you were speaking was, when you're already doing so many things, how do you then get your head around what all of these different territories are looking for and where your show might fit? If it's like, well, it's not good for linear in Canada, but maybe it's good for streaming, but maybe it's good for linear as a co-production in New Zealand. How do you learn that part of the business?
I just think that I don't want to, like, I think that, yeah, it's really hard.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been in the industry for a very long time, and I can just honestly say that probably I recognized this like 5 years ago. And it was something that kind of was like, oh yeah, like, how come these shows are figuring out this? They're not just relying on whether they get a green light from CBC or Bell. How come this show is happening? And then, and so it just kind of, it tweaked for me that this is something that I could do. But then the other piece of it, and this is the hard part, at least for me, it's bloody expensive to fly around the world and go to these conferences, and you can't just go to one. You got to go to like 5 in a year, so everybody can see you. So they'll go, oh yeah, I saw you at MIP. Yeah, let's have a meeting at Content London. It's so crazy, right? And who has time for that? I mean, I know for me, like MIP is happening right now. I'm not there. I just don't have time as a writer, someone who's a creative. I don't have time to go to all these places. But what I will say is that I can pick up the phone or email somebody or say, hey, can we go for coffee? What happened at MIP? You know, I can read Variety online. I can read the Hollywood Reporter online and go, oh, so these shows are selling and this is happening and whatnot. For people who are here who, some of you know me, you can email me and you can say, hey, what is happening internationally? I have a show. Do you think this would work for anybody? And, and most of you who know me know that it takes me time to get back to you, but typically I will respond, and I'm always happy to go for a coffee and just chat. But I think that's the work, is trying to find those folks who are willing to be just simply helpful. That's really important.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think I was going to say, a lot of it is, gossip. Gathering information from friends. And I mean, one idea I had, like, I like the researching and just watching what other places, like what other territories are doing, like what is getting greenlit. Just watching a bunch of content, different types of content is great. And also, just like recently I started to think of like competitions, like just like well-known, like international like programs or competitions that like let you interact with writers from different places or territory, or like different countries. I feel like getting in touch with things like that, or just going to like anything that's like not too expensive, very cheap, or just very like accessible in a way, I think is another way to just like get your face in front of a different community, like just a different crowd. I think might be another way, but really it's just, yeah, talk to your people, like talk to your friends, and yeah, gather, have some generals with even producers. If you're in that position, like have generals, like they'll tell you. So you'll gather information that way too.
Do you have any kind of rituals or places that you protect for, like in your process as a writer or in your writer brain? I'm just thinking, you know, there's so much about this that's about calculating where the industry is at, trying to figure out how you're going to produce something that will meet somebody else's expectations. And I know that there's a lot of writers who get pretty lost in that. It's easy to kind of just have your brain spin out. So are there ways that you protect yourself and that you like make sure that you stay true to the core of where your ideas are coming from, where your voice is coming from?
Well, for me, I just want to write comedies and what's funny. So I guess I really tried to not lose sight of what's funny to me. Like, and I go to a lot of comedy shows. I watch a lot of TV, a lot of sitcoms, even from the 90s and 2000s. Yeah, I just try to really strengthen my comedic voice and just let that guide whichever projects I make and wanna seek out.
Yeah, I think for me, it's a pretty similar answer. I mean, I typically, and maybe this is not smart, but I don't actually start from a place of what does the market want, personally. I just don't think that's never how I've been able to navigate my career at this point. I feel like for me, it's like, what's the show that I really want to watch right now? Like, what is something that I'm really excited about that I just wish existed that needs to be out there? And that's where I start from. Because if I'm not watching it and if I'm not looking forward to telling my friends about this show they need to watch, I'm not going to write it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And for you?
I just think that I think when you write, there is no place to hide, right? Like you have to, like, somehow you're going to get to a place where you're going to write the thing that you like, that you're trying to keep secret or trying to hide. It's going to end up on the page, whether it's like the first draft or the 20th. So I don't know if you can protect anything. I think writing is about being vulnerable, right? And it's about trying to kind of, you know, you're trying to put your authentic self out there, which I think that is why it's really painful when, as a writer, you spend a lot of time investing in like characters and stories, and you go into a network and within like the space of 15 minutes, you're told, well, nobody wants this. And I think it's difficult because what at least for me, those characters still exist, right? They still every so often will come and talk to me about, you know, well, what's happening with us? Are we just stuck here? And I think that's something that we, like, it's just a thing that we have to learn to deal with and kind of, you know, put those voices away while we focus on the next project, always with that hope that we're going to break, and at some point we'll be able to pull that show off the shelf and bring those characters to life in a real way.
So I was just going to add, just adding to that, just thinking about like some advice that another writer has given me in the past, but just like making sure that even though this is the nature of the business, to have to, you know, you're just enough, you're creating authentically and you're putting yourself out there, and this is your baby, and they're going to just rip it apart. But I think that at the end of the day, like writing something that you feel really good about and just like putting it all out there, I feel like for me is easier in a way to kind of walk away if I've given it like 1,000% and I've written the show that I wanted to write, rather than trying to turn it into something that I don't think it should be. I think that it's always painful, but it feels a little bit better when you can actually really feel like you've been authentic with yourself too.
And then if you have that energy that you can lean on, you know, if you throw everything into it and you know that you have that passion and drive to do this thing, and you get a no or a not quite from a broadcaster, it's easier to keep that momentum going, saying like, okay, well, maybe it's not here, maybe it's not this, maybe it's not right now. And so it kind of becomes part of the same like generative wheel, instead of being stopped in your tracks and thinking, okay, I have to rethink everything that I'm doing. It seems really healthy. That's why you guys are working. Yeah, I was just going to shift over to the audience and see if we've got some questions. Do we have a mic out there? Maybe you just want to yell?
Sure. I thought it was so convenient that she was right here.
Oh, perfect.
Oh, and there you go. Wonderful. Just have a question to Floyd, really, because you said something which kind of took me by surprise. You said that if we have a show, it doesn't necessarily have to be for Canada. It can be for anywhere in the world. But the conventional wisdom that I've heard is you can't get an American broadcaster on board until you have a Canadian broadcaster, because they're not interested in trying to create a show with all of their own money if there's not a Canadian partner. So I'm wondering, are you in a somewhat, because you have a track record, right? You've had Dickstown for 4 years. So is that why the American broadcasters may look at something that you bring to them as opposed to someone, or, yeah, can you just further explain?
Sure. I think the difference is, so, and I'm just talking purely as a writer, because producing it's a completely different thing. So as a writer, so I have an agent in the US, I can go to a producer in the US, and the producer will then go to a studio, and then the producer they'll try to package that show with like an actor or a director, and then we'll all go together to see the network. Kind of like, you know, when Khaleesi brought the dragons to come see Cersei in Game of Thrones, right? Like it kind of works like that. So what I'm saying is that you can, and even, I mean, honestly, like, I'm not, even back in the dark ages, I remember being, I think I was 26, and I had written a feature script, and I met an executive at a TIFF party from Paramount, and I said to, and I didn't know anything at the time, and I said to him, I said, hey, like, I've written this feature. I gave him a log line. He said, send it to me. So I sent it to them. They were like, they read it. They wrote me back a letter. This was before email. And, you know, I'm like, that's kind of cool. Like, there weren't I sometimes think we have a lot more barriers here because there are fewer places and fewer spots. So I think it's hard if you're working at a broadcaster to have to say no all the time. Like that does a lot to you psychologically, so I don't want to discount that. But I do think that there's a lot more openness to people to look at stuff, to consider things, to read a log line, to tell you whether or not something could work for them or if they want to see more or not. So definitely, I do think there's a lot more opportunity globally than there is here.
Any other questions?
Hi, I think that's a fascinating response to that question. Oftentimes, we think that we're in, well, I shouldn't actually put myself in there because I'm no longer in the industry, but creatives think of themselves as making cultural products and not necessarily think of themselves as being a part of trying to commercialize something. And that entrepreneurial verve that's required is somewhat missing, I find, throughout a lot of the conversations here. It's an economic development thing. We're trying to package cultural products. We need to sell them. And so if you have something that is well written, that will resonate with audiences, yes, there are gatekeepers, but the entrepreneurial spirit has to kick in at some point and not be dependent so much on just a local market to be able to get your product out there. And I think there is a wider market that we should be looking at as creatives, and the business side of it can't be lost. And so I love the answer that you get, Floyd. You can go to the States, you can go anywhere else in the world if there is an audience out there and don't have to rely on making it here in Canada with what it is that you're producing. I think that shouldn't get lost.
Thank you. Any other questions? Either of you guys?
Okay, cool. Hi, I'm Eric. I'm also a screenwriter. I was just wondering about your writing process, maybe an open general question. Like, does it start with a extensive outlining, then a vomit draft, and then, you know, follow-up drafts after that? What's your process like?
Who wants to take that? Is it always different? Or
Listen,
do you have
I
like
mean, it does involve all of the things you said. I think right now I'm just like, it's messy. My writing process is messy, but like it really is like, yeah. I mean, it starts from an idea, and then you kind of just like, you know, go from, you know, like what this show is. Like I like to start really with like a like free writing exercise where I just like write down like everything I think I know about the show, everything from who these characters are to what are their wants and what are their goals and what is conflict. And I just really get into like every aspect of the show that I can, and really just from there, you know, just starting the development process. After that's done, then I will get to a point where I'm ready to write at least like a pitch for myself, like literally just like a one-pager, like here's what the show is, here's what I think the show is, and then like begin the breaking process. So I mean, you've outlined a lot of the steps of what it is, but really it can be, I'm simplifying it because it takes a long time, but essentially that's essentially where I start, is always like, for myself, what is this? And then just like take my time figuring it out before I get to breaking, and then the outline, and then essentially script.
Yeah, I found it really helpful recently to start with this, like a one-pager. And then also I'll think about, just because I know I'm gonna get the question, why I should be the one to tell this story. And I'll try to tie it into something about me, some kind of personal thing about me. Yeah, and then from there I'll do like a vomit pilot outline and then vomit every draft after that. Yeah.
Sounds messy too.
Honesty.
I tend not to, I don't write anything. I'll have an idea, I'll think about it, I'll kind of play it out until I hit a wall with it, and then I'll forget about it. And then if that idea comes back 2 weeks later or a month later, then I'll think about it some more. And I try to think I try to think through the pilot story in my head before I will start actually writing, because I feel like I have to, because the problem for me is I feel like I get excited by ideas all the time. Like, you know, I had a meeting this morning with these two women, and they were telling me this story, and I'm like, oh my God, they were like pitching me a doc, and I'm like, no, that's a TV series, and here's what we could do, and it's never been done before. Like, so I just get very excited when I hear something, because that's what drives me, right? It's like if we haven't seen it and we haven't done it, and it's like I'm right there. That excites me. So when I'm thinking about shows, it's like, yeah, I get excited, but then I'm like, oh yeah, but what about this is a problem? So then I have to let it go until I solve the problem mentally before jumping back into it. So it takes me it sometimes can take me a year before I'll actually start putting pen to paper.
Oh, that's really interesting. Feeling like we are probably going to have to end. I know that there's a lot of pressure to stay on time. If there's somebody here who could just give me a flag if we're... I thought so. Well, thank you all so much for coming to the panel and speaking today. Like I said, we kind of talked around in circles about a few different things, but I think it's a really interesting topic to get into. So thanks again, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you.